This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien starts today's show with a grain market update. He also explains some of the current market headlines he is seeing. Continuing the show is Ernie Minton, Dean of K-State's College of Agriculture, as he discusses his October Statewide. Stories this month include nanotechnology, remote working, Hall of Fame inductees, an upcoming conference, and a College of Agriculture ranking. A weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond wraps up this week's shows. He says a lot of Kansas got rain this past week, but likely won't see any in this coming week. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with a grain market update. And as always, we're joined with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby. I appreciate it.
Dan, kicking off the conversation with what are futures looking like?
Well, start out with the one crop that's showing the most strength. At this time, soybeans have been in a somewhat of a trend higher, had been trading around $13 even. Closed on Thursday, the January contract did at $13.28 and a fourth. One thing that people will see is that we've rolled over now from the November contract being the lead contract. Since we're now in that delivery period for November beans, we now consider the January the contract that elevators are pricing off of and are considering or are making their basis adjustments from. So soybeans have been moving up, and we may talk about this later. Some dry either too wet or too dry, depending on what part of South America you're in. So still a long ways to go. The market's not panicking by any stretch, but still you have weather conditions in South America affecting a little bit, maybe prematurely, some would say, affecting outlook in the soybean market. Corn prices just kind of still closed on Friday at $4.70, and I think that has to do with anticipation of next week's USDA WASDE report probably showing not lower corn yields, but equal to or higher yields. There was one farmer-driven survey that came out. I think it was from StoneX, actually. You can say their name. They put this out in public, stating that they thought yields were up a little bit from their month-ago numbers. Of course, they came in, I think, about 175 or so a month ago. USDA came in 173, so they went up to 175 and a half. So does USDA go up a half a bushel? So you kind of gauge all that. But anyway, that expectation is there. And going back on the soybeans, there's also the expectation probably that the U.S. soybean number in terms of yields and production probably, very likely to get scaled back yet. So as we sit here, one week from a major report coming out, you've got anticipation of more supplies coming in on the corn and feed grain market, for corn anyway, and lower supplies for soybeans, and the market's kind of reflecting that. I should say for wheat markets, at least in the last day or so, we've stopped the major fall off that we had been seeing. Closed on Thursday at 641.5, had gotten down to about 625 or so. And I think if we do talk about major headlines in the world, you're looking at some news out of the Black Sea region that would be potentially positive for U.S. wheat exports, and some pace issues to look at that are worthwhile to consider also. And if you want to, I can talk about cash markets if you'd like.
Go
forth. Okay, they still are seeing cash corn prices now at the 6 major markets that we monitor, all having fallen below $5, even in the Garden City market at $4.95, top price being bid there. We have some new crop bids, interestingly, that are starting to creep up. A new crop bid of $5.16 for next fall, 2024 for corn in the Garden City area, $5.06 in Salina, $5.07 Hutchinson. So that's interesting to watch. Again, grain sorghum, based on, although it's choppy, pretty strong export demand. So you've got pretty strong grain sorghum prices. Again, in the Topeka market, corn price $4.53, the the grain sorghum price $4.95, $4.70 in Salina for corn, $5.15 for grain sorghum. So, and similar differences in the Hutchinson market and elsewhere. So we see what export demand, once it kicks in, what it can do. And again, China, main buyer, taking that in for domestic. There's a domestic alcohol product, his name I always forget how to pronounce, that they produce, and a lot of Chinese buyers coming in and coming after that to secure supplies. Apparently, learns from our good friend Guy Allen that apparently U.S. grain sorghum makes a better product than Australian grain sorghum for this one thing that they brew. So that's a positive for us, I guess. And they're aggressive right now. When you do look at current sales, we're about 47% of the way through the way to meeting the USDA's projection by the time they count actual shipments and what's bought ahead, and we're only about 17% of the way through the marketing year. So great guns, really, for grain sorghum, and you see it in the prices. Soybean prices, as we've rolled over, it's interesting to watch how that's handled at different elevator locations. Strongest bids in the state out of Hutchinson, a bid of $13.03. Other places across the state, all more like low of $12.18 up to about $12.78 in Salina and Hutchinson. Again, out to the west, a little bit weaker down the southeast corner. So soybeans are as they are, so this run up that's happening a little bit with the potential, depending on what happens to that WASDE report coming out next Thursday at the 9th, we'll see if that lends more strength. And for wheat prices, in most of the strongest prices that we see across the state, cash prices, Salina $6.22, Topeka $6.17, $6.21 in Hutchinson. But then when you look at the Columbus, Garden City, and Colby area, you're closer to the $5.60 to $5.83 area. New crop bids, that's probably where the game's at right now in terms of seeing what the market will offer producers in an enticement to plant. Of course, some would say we're outside the back end of that window, but for what remains to be seeded, top bids, Topeka $6.37, Hutchinson $6.37, $6.27 in Salina, $6.17 Garden City, $6.07 in Colby. So whereas the cash bids in some of those areas fallen below $6, new crop bids holding up somewhat okay. And I think someplace out in here, the domestic industry, domestic millers probably start to become concerned about low prices and how they think farmers might react to them, and what they'll see in terms of U.S. wheat acreage and U.S. wheat production next year. The idea being that what's happening now with wheat coming charging out of the Black Sea area, both Russia and Ukraine through Europe to affect world markets, it may not always be there. One drought and pretty easily build a scenario that if we have a short crops happening in Black Sea region and we come looking for a buffer of supplies from the U.S. in 2024, well, if we cut back our acres a lot, then you really tighten things up here domestically. So I guess I'm an economist. They pay me to worry and think about these future scenarios, but I do wonder about the other shoe falling in the wheat market if we cut back U.S. acres too much.
Dan, you mentioned a few market headlines. However, there are a couple more that you'd like to share with producers.
Well, yes. We've got word here recently that Russia is thinking of banning its own wheat exports during the December through February period. Now, are they playing games with the market? We don't know for sure, but they've had a strong pace of exports. And if Russia, which has been dominating the wheat market, would stand back from their shipments, then it puts pressure upon all these other buyers to come in and all these other sellers, to make up the difference. And again, we have dry conditions in Australia, the U.S. We're looking at cutting back our production, dry conditions in parts of Europe, too much water down in Australia, in Argentina. So again, I don't want to just imagine a scenario that could work. But if Russia, such a dominant force in the wheat market, cuts back to some degree their shipments, then that makes waves. So that's a big thing to consider. And India has gone back and forth on their. Most of the time, they're pretty internalized in terms of sending wheat out or not, but they've had some problems with their rice crop, and we don't raise a lot of rice here in Kansas, but in that part of the world, you've got a lot of protectionism that starts to happen, a lot of panicky markets when the rice starts to get tight. And I remember the 2007, 2008 year when market prices jumped so high, et cetera. some of those major rallies that have happened in the grains that we grow basically were started with rice having its problems over there in the Asian theater. If you can't have rice, then what do you come for? Well, you come for wheat. You come do a lot of things. So that's also something to watch. And also, it sounds like that the UN brokered trade corridor that had been protected in Turkey involved, et cetera. It sounds like that's not going to be extended. And now the Ukraine, through its own military, is establishing its own corridor for moving grain out of the country. And really, I guess, bravo for the Ukrainians that they're not relying on, that they're able to provide their own security in that situation. So I guess you've got some of those stories, and there's a bunch more that are all coming in. If we were to go on and we talk about how El Nino is affecting different parts of South America differentially, but let's save that one for another day.
And Dan, as we wrap up today's conversation and bring it just a little bit closer back to home, what is the harvest progress like?
In Kansas, the last numbers we had showed corn at about just approaching 90% done. So now with the drier weather we've had, it's probably getting all that much closer to almost all done. Grain sorghum progress, trailing corn a bit, cotton trailing corn, but still coming in towards 50 and moving along. Soybean harvest progress in Kansas, again trailing, ahead of what the USDA is showing for the national numbers. We're at about 80%. I guess we're about 80% done for soybeans in Kansas as well. The thing that stands out there is we're ahead of the national pace. What happens when you have a short crop, you're not filling up bins and having handling problems, is that you just race through the fields. Well, we're ahead of pace, so that's kind of a harbinger, a little bit of a signal that, hey, we might be a bit short by some percentage of what we're even expecting for soybeans, and we'll see what the November 9th numbers tell us from the USDA.
Dan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us a grain market update.
Thank you, Shelby. I appreciate the opportunity.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing the October Statewide. And the person who puts on the Statewide is the Director of K-State Research and Extension and K-State's College of Agriculture Dean, Ernie Minton. Ernie, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And Ernie, in your October Statewide, the first story you kick off the Statewide with is discussing nanotechnology being used to combat mosquitoes. Yeah,
this is really pretty exciting research, and I think that the goal here is to bring in nanotechnology in a novel way and use some known insecticides that are effective at killing mosquitoes, but really cut down on insecticide use writ large. And so, the initial results are really very, very promising in this particular research group. Which Jeff Whitworth is a part of, got a lot of notoriety as well.
And something else technology-related in the College of Agriculture, and maybe not always thought about for agriculture, but the Kansas Forest Service recently launched a pretty cool wildfire risk assessment tool.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that what we've experienced is a really increased number of wildfires. And actually, your listeners may not be aware of that, but it makes sense, I think, considering the drought conditions that we've been under recently. And so this tool is really very timely, very effective in terms of predicting chances of a wildfire. As a matter of fact, I dropped my address in and kind of I'm assured that I probably in a residential area am okay, but it's a really nice tool.
And both of these are technology kind of based, but right. Technology, something really important to agriculture.
Of course. It's becoming more and more important in these settings that we've just talked about, but in all kinds of other settings related to digital ag and data handling and those kinds of things.
Something else that people could be looking forward to and put on their calendars is an upcoming conference at K-State.
Yeah, Robin Reed has a conference planned on November 10th that is the first of its kind to address landowner issues with more and more remote ownership of property. This has implications for landowners. And so looking forward to her bringing that conference together here on the K-State campus and, providing relevant topics for landowners.
And that conference, not only for people in Kansas, but really anyone who might be owning land in Kansas.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. It isn't necessarily for those people who only live in Kansas, but those who may have property and live elsewhere.
And supporting producers in Kansas, K-State was recently awarded some money for grain sorghum research.
Yeah, that's a very nice award. Sarah Sexton Bowser is one who's on that award that really does a great job promoting grain sorghum research and extension work here in the state of Kansas. We really do have to keep our focus on alternative crops. Grain sorghum is one of those choices because, there are conditions and times in which grain sorghum is the crop you want to plant. So we're really pleased that they've gotten this award.
So really taking the time then to explore avenues that could support agriculture producers, even if they don't know it might.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because she and Terry Felderhoff are looking at traits and bringing novel traits to market, collaboration with seed producers as well.
And talking about research and working on different things, another article in your October Statewide talked about remote work in Kansas.
Yeah, this was an interesting topic, and we thought it was an important one to bring to light because through the pandemic, obviously, we were actually forced to get used to working remotely. And I think that as we look back on those things, certainly, there wasn't time to plan for it because, it was spring break and then we were supposed to come back and then we didn't. And folks, particularly on the instructional side, really had to pivot. So there's a group now of best practices for remote work that are being talked about and emphasized in this training because, we feel like remote work is here to stay, but we want to be very, very effective at that remote work as well.
And maybe not so much for the farmers who are out working every day, but maybe for the person who wants an off-farm job but wants to stay on the farm?
Yeah, that's a real option because they may be able to accomplish that work on that second job by not necessarily going to town, but really tackling that job from home.
And Ernie, we've had some really important people to K-State and K-State Research and Extension recently be inducted into some Hall of Fames, and the first one being the Agriculture Hall of Fame for Barry Flinchbaugh.
Yeah, Dr. Flinchbaugh was inducted into the Agriculture Hall of Fame. Really, really nice and very fitting recognition of his life and his work and contributions. I went over to that particular ceremony, and it really was just really very appropriate and just really a celebration to an acknowledgement of his impact.
And someone else inducted into the Hall of Fame, however, this one being the National 4-H Hall of Fame, Tricia Cash.
Right. Tricia had a really great nearly 40-year career, 39, I think, to be exact, and really just highlighting those folks who are dedicated to their work. And in Tricia's case, she exemplified that, kind of moving up through the ranks at the 4-H Foundation. I think one of her accomplishments was a record-breaking sales for a particular cookbook, and that actually raised a lot of funds, and so it's a great story.
And those, of course, are just two people that are very important to these, but there's a multitude of other people important to K-State.
Oh, absolutely. I think, when it comes to the end of one's career, that's the time to recognize them, but at the same time, we acknowledge that, there are just many, many folks dedicated to the success of the college and K-State Research and Extension.
And there's a recent ranking that's come out that has shown people's dedication to K-State's College of Agriculture.
Yeah, that's the niche.com rankings, and this rankings that, frankly, a few years ago, I was totally unaware of them, and I was told by someone, hey, did you realize the college was ranked number 4? And so we've moved around 4, 5, 6, 7. One year we were, maybe 11th or whatever, but we've consistently hung in as a top-ranked, usually top 10, sometimes top 5, College of Agriculture. And, of course, that's a matter of pride. I don't fully understand all the components of the niche.com rankings, but the reconnaissance that we've been able to do on can we understand how we got there is really very, very satisfying, because it appears that the niche.com rankings include a survey of alumni, and those alumni really answer in a very, very positive way about how they were treated when they were a student. Their advisor cared for their success. Their instructors were interested in learning in the classroom. And so those are things that we can control and that our faculty quite obviously do a very, very good job at. So that's why we're proud of that.
So not only an example of being a K-State family while you're here at Kansas State University, but even beyond your time here.
Yes, absolutely. So we don't have control over the population of the state, the tax base of the state, the kinds of things that other universities that are larger than K-State and ahead of us in the rankings have, but we do have those alumni who came through K-State, got a degree, and have very, very positive things about the way they were treated when they were here.
And Ernie, as we wrap up today's conversation, we just recently, last week, wrapped up K-State Research and Extension's annual conference. And so what was it like to see all these people around from across the state back on campus?
Yeah, it's always nice to see folks come in for annual conference. This is an important touch point for a lot of folks across the state. We call it K-State Research and Extension. It has a heavy extension focus, and that is absolutely okay. We had a great session on Wednesday with Dr. Marshall Stewart sort of highlighting the changes, the elevation of extension in terms of its prominence up to the university level, on par with teaching and research, and I think that was received very, very well.
So just a great reminder that your county extension agents or your district extension agents are great people to reach out to if you need help.
Absolutely. And they're really, really a dedicated group of folks.
Ernie, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us an update from your October Statewide.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
That was Kansas State University's College of Agriculture Dean and Director of K-State Research and Extension, Ernie Minton. In today's show notes, which as always you're able to find on agtoday.net, I'll place a couple of links if you'd like to check them out. The first one will be a link that will allow you to sign up for Dean Minton's monthly e-newsletter of Statewide. The next one will be a link for you to be able to check out the Kansas Forest Service Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal, also referred to as WRAP. You can also find it by going to kansasforests.org. Again, that is kansasforests.org. And as always on agtoday.net, if you're reaching your destination or missed a previous show you'd like to catch back up on from Agriculture Today, you can find them by going to the website. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by Kansas State University meteorologist Chip Redmond with this week's weather update. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we complete our Friday show with a weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, taking a look at the week we've already had, and the week had some precipitation in it.
Yeah, we have, mostly for south central to southeast Kansas, even a little bit up into northeast Kansas, but much needed rainfall in areas that unfortunately are the same areas that got rain a week ago. We saw as much as a half to an inch of rain in those places, localized, a little bit lighter too, so it wasn't anything to the point of what we saw last week. But we average anywhere from 0.6 of an inch to near 0.7 in the southeast to only about less than a quarter inch of rainfall in the northwest a week. So that half inch to an inch is above normal precipitation for that area, and that ended up with big changes. And
some of those big changes being for the drought monitor.
Yep, for the first time since last April before that, so April 2022 is the last time that we had the state in no area of D4 or exceptional drought. We removed that this week with some areas in the south central part of the state getting removed, and so now there is no D4 exceptional drought in the state. And so Granted, a lot of areas are still hurting. There's some big long-term impacts that are going to take months, years to overcome, but just another step in the right direction when we look at overall drought conditions across the state, kind of gradually shrinking.
And something else, though, we had this past week was some pretty cool weather.
Yeah, we did. We had a prominent cold front that brought the widespread freeze for everybody now, for sure, for multiple days. And then really the cold air went as far south as the Gulf. Very prominent cold front, classic late fall. And so with that, we saw temperatures get down into the single digits, saw low single digits in the northwest part of the state with some snow that they received over the weekend, just isolated up in the northwest corner. And then most everyone got down into the teens. And so we broke some low-hanging fruit records that were around the teens. And then as well as Monday was really cold across the state. Some areas didn't get above freezing all day. So we broke some cold record high temperatures as well.
Can we be expecting to see those cool temperatures moving into next week?
Yeah, we've seen the cold air kind of retreat already off to the east, and gradually we're warming back up. Especially we got some really dry air, so we're still cool in the morning, but we warm up very quickly in the afternoon, and we're in for some pretty nice weather here over the next couple of days to even the next week, where temperatures are hovering above normal. We'll have some cloud cover that'll kind of check up temperatures a little bit over the weekend, but above normal, and with that means more sunshine, drier conditions. Clear skies, though, mean no rainfall, especially in the areas in the southwest where we need it. We're not going to see that, and we're going to stay, for the most part, dry.
And as we've just started the month of November, as we look ahead to kind of the whole month, any big expectations?
Yeah, so we got a pretty prominent atmospheric river event ongoing in the northwest, which is not your typical El Nino look to things. We still are in a moderate El Nino to borderline strong. That's going to eventually subside by middle of the month, and we'll see that jet stream shift back further south with some hint at maybe a potential storm system mid to late November. Hopefully it avoids any major holiday. But we're going to be in a pretty mundane pattern, I think, till that does start to buckle and we start to see an overall shift in the northern hemisphere.
Maybe something not super weather-related, but important to mention, we do have a time change coming up.
Yep, time change is this Saturday. It doesn't really impact weather a whole lot. We're still going to get weather, whether the time is 1 hour earlier. Just keep in mind that, it's going to get dark a lot earlier in the evening. And it does have an impact on climate records just because records are taken the same time every day, and they don't acknowledge the time change. So when we look at how it impacts weather, it's very minimal. But there is definitely an impact.
Chip, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us a weather update.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was Kansas State University meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.